Hello and welcome to a new year and a new series of our 261 Fearless Empowerment Talks. We've really enjoyed bringing you the expertise and the wisdom from our guests over the last couple of years. And this year is going to be no different. We already have a really wonderful lineup of women from around the world ready to share their stories and their expertise and wisdom with us all over again. So that's fantastic. 261 Fearless, if you don't know us, we are a global women's running network, which uses running to unite and empower women. And we really believe that education is one of the keys to doing that. Now, we have a really extensive and thorough education program for our club directors and our coaches within our organisation. So our 261 Fearless Empowerment Talks are our way of reaching out to you with our work. So we really hope you are going to enjoy them. We have women of influence, leadership from the world of business, sport, health, and many more. So do join us for this 2023 series. Now, today's guest is no stranger to 261 Fearless. Caroline de Moraes was the wonderful host on our 261 Fearless Forward webinar series. Now, this was a series of online videos helping women move from fearful to fearless. And that video series is available on our website, 261fearless.org, in the education section. So do check it out. Now, Caroline, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a sports presenter. She has worked extensively for Red Bull, for the BBC, Eurosport, Channel 4, reporting from some of the world's biggest sporting events. And most recently, she was in Qatar at the Men's World Cup, the Football World Cup. She was presenting for FIFA Plus and Aurora Media. And that's what I want to focus on today, because not only was she there presenting at one of the most iconic events on the planet, but she was there with her newborn baby. So I have a lot of questions. So welcome, Caroline.
Hi, thanks for having me, Juliet. Yeah, I'm sure lots of people have lots of questions. I'm probably questioning myself, really.
Well, I think particularly maybe those who are either mothers or thinking about becoming mothers, who are working women, will want to know, how did it go? So my first question, though, is before baby was born. And I just wondered what came first. We have family planning, but was it the invitation to the World Cup or the day that you found out the due date for your baby?
Well, weirdly, I didn't know I was pregnant when I'd first got a job at the World Cup, but it was for something else. And it was working I think it was 16, 17-hour days, which is pretty normal and pretty standard at the World Cup. So I just said yes, as normal. And then I found out I was pregnant and I thought, and I was still kind of naive and still thinking, I think I could do it. I think it'd be doable. It's manageable. It's my first baby. And I was like, I mean, how hard can it really be? And then as time went on, and I think pregnancy started making me more tired, I was like, God, I'm struggling just with the pregnancy part near the end. And I was sort of going, actually, I think 16-hour days is going to be quite hard. And I sort of heard through the grapevine that lots of companies had pitched for this show. It was a show that was, I think, the entire day or the shift would be around 4 or 5 hours. So suddenly I was like, that would be way more manageable. But I'd heard that they'd taken me off the pitch. So lots of companies had pitched me, because the world of football is quite small and I speak lots of languages. So people know who I am. So they tend to put me on their pitch if it involves languages and big events. But I heard that they'd taken me off the pitch because they were like, she's pregnant, she's going to give birth. And I think I was still like, no, I can work. And I guess I wanted to be part of that conversation. I wanted to be part of the decision making, that if you're going to take me off, I want it to be because I'm like, no, I can't do it, or I don't want to do it, rather than have that decision be made for me. Even though it was the best of intentions, I think they were thinking, she's going to be a new mom, she's going to be excited, she won't want to come. But I really wanted to be part of that conversation. So when I found out that they had taken me off, I kept being like, no, or I found out that a couple, I think, had taken me off. So I messaged everyone I knew that was pitching for the job and was like, just so you know, I'm well up for this and I'm going to go no matter what, no matter what. And they were kind of like, oh, okay. And then FIFA requested me. FIFA was like, oh, if we could have Caroline, that'd be great. So then I started pushing more because it still wasn't confirmed. And at this point, I'd entered the kind of phase where you could give birth at any minute. So then I was like, right, I need this baby to come. So I was doing all the things that people tell you to make the baby come early so that, yeah, I could have a bit of a chunk between flying out and coming, and so that I could adjust. So I was like walking, I was doing all these things. And then I think I was about 38 weeks pregnant and my contractions started. And I was like, yes, we're going to be early. But then everyone around me was like, take it easy. So then I went from being vertical and walking and I was nonstop. I was still flying. I was working as much as I could. I went from being vertical to horizontal, and yeah, basically my contraction stopped and everything halted. And I ended up being 2 weeks overdue, which meant that I eventually flew out when the baby was only 2.5 weeks. So the plan did not go as I'd originally hoped. But it was kind of a bit of a mix. I knew about the job first, and I obviously then turned down the 17-hour job, but I knew of going to Qatar first. So I had the invitation first, but it wasn't for this specific job. This specific job came later, and it was a bit of me kind of fighting for it in a way.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that because it sounded like everybody was making decisions for you, and that you had to be really strong to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's weird because there are so many working mums and there are so many people talking about it, but I think until you're a working mum or you're in the situation, I don't think you really realize how difficult it can be or how tricky it can be, especially I think if you're not part of a company and you don't have maternity leave. Because if you have maternity leave, then you're just off, and then you have to kind of juggle the coming back. Whereas if you're like me and you're freelance, then it's so much more tricky, I think, because you've got the emotional implication of giving birth and being a new mum, or even if it's the second birth, because I think each one is different. You have the pregnancy, which my pregnancy was pretty straightforward, but lots of people aren't. I mean, my friend's pregnancy haven't all been smooth sailing. And then you have the financial aspect as well. And you've got the emotional and the physical, because giving birth is physical, whether you have a C-section or a natural birth. So I think there's lots of balls being juggled, and until you're in the situation. And even while I was pregnant, I think was very naive. I was like, it'll be fine. And even when people talk about, C-section, they say, oh, it can be a much harder recovery. A natural delivery is a much easier recovery. And I mean, I haven't had a C-section, so I don't know. It probably is easier, but it's not easy. It's still really difficult because your body has been through something and you do have to give your body time. And I think going through it has made me go, there's a whole industry of people going through, or a whole group of people going through this and trying to navigate work life. And before being in this situation, I've just been very blasé and been like, oh, hiya. And if anyone was pregnant, I'd be like, oh, congratulations, here's a gift. Or if they give birth, I like, come see the baby, hold the baby, give them a gift, and then be like, oh, well done. But actually, there's so much more to it. There's so much more to it. So I almost feel like I need to apologize to every mum I've ever worked with.
I think the other thing that you mentioned there is that everybody's different, and you don't know how you're going to feel or how you're going to react or what your pregnancy or your labour is going to be like. So it's very hard to have a kind of a standard, isn't it?
Yeah, every pregnancy is completely different. And I've had friends tell me that, some of them have had, I think it's HG, where they're constantly throwing up and they have to go to hospital. I've had other friends just tell me that they were so tired. So I think everyone's pregnancy is different. I had very low expectations of pregnancy. I've never wanted to be pregnant, really. I've always wanted to be a mum and I've liked kids, but the pregnancy part, I was like, oh, don't fancy that. And so I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't have any symptoms really for the first like 10 weeks. And it's really bizarre because you find out you're pregnant, you call the doctor and they're like, yeah, come back in 12 weeks.
12 weeks.
And you're just walking around, you're like, I have a baby inside me. And I mean, I know that it's not technically a baby, but when you're pregnant and you're keeping the baby, you start thinking of it as a baby. And so you're then going, I'm pregnant. And there's nothing to do. You just have to wait. And your body is incredible because your body just knows what to do. It's not like my body stopped and was like, today we're making an eyeball, so we're going to be really tired. It just does it. You don't really do anything. And so I thought the first 10 weeks was fine. And then I did feel quite tired, and I had a job, and it was a 24-hour race in France, in Le Mans. It was a Le Mans 24-hour race. And it was still that period where you're not supposed to tell people. And so I was just like, okay, I don't know how this is going to work. And I could feel the tiredness, but also it's a 24-hour race, so I'm normally quite tired anyway. But I remember we get given a trailer, and you kind of stay in it because you have to stay on track, but you can't really get that much rest because you can hear the bikes. And I remember going in more frequently than I would normally, and my co-host was like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, cool, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, you're going to sleep a lot. I was like, no, I'm so sorry. And then I told him, and I was just like, I'm pregnant. And he was so nice. He was just like, oh my God, my wife was like, oh, she was throwing up so much, she was doing this. So it was nice that he had obviously had children. He remembered what it was like for his wife. So he was really supportive and he was really kind. I didn't really tell that much. I didn't tell the crew, I don't think. So they must have all thought I was weird. But by the second race, I did tell them, and they knew, and they were really accommodating. I think they just thought I was sick or something. But yeah, it's tricky. It was relatively smooth, but I think the last 2 weeks of the first trimester, I felt the tiredness. But it's also difficult to say because I was working a 24-hour race, but I was more tired than normal. But overall, I think my pregnancy was pretty smooth. I was sick here and there, but it was manageable. It was manageable.
And thinking about after pregnancy, once baby was born, and then you're faced with packing your suitcase and going, what anxieties did you have about actually being there and presenting with a 2.5-week-old baby? Any?
Yeah,
or did you just go with the flow?
I mean, I did have anxiety. I think the anxiety started in the last few weeks, from probably about 38 weeks. Because I think before that, I was just going, I'll be fine. So the production company were all kind of calling and going, okay, we're confirming you. Are you sure you can do this? And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to take my husband and my baby and it'll be fine. And they were like, okay, but I mean, this is your first baby. We feel like you don't know. And then some of them would say, my wife couldn't get up for like a month. Or they'd say, my wife was doing this. And I was like, yeah, it'll be fine. And I was just very kind of naive to it. And I had this strong feeling in my head that the baby was going to be early. I just thought the baby was going to be early. And I know that first time babies are late, but I thought mine was going to be early. So I was just like, it'll be fine. And then I thought she'll be about 6 weeks. I didn't know at this point also that it was a girl, but I thought she'll be 6 weeks and it'll be fine. There'll be no problems. And she was not. And I think that's where it became, my anxiety in the last kind of 2 weeks became the problem. I had to concentrate on the birth, but in the back of my mind, I had, you need to come today. Every day from my due date, I was like, you need to come today, which is like the opposite of what you should do for a baby to be born. But I didn't have the bliss of a maternity leave. And that again, I guess marries in with the self-employed kind of, we don't have a union, we don't have all these things in place. So it is more difficult and you do have to make more difficult decisions. And there is a little bit of guilt because I guess people's comments, even well-meaning, from family as well and friends, they're well-meaning comments, but like, you need this time to bond with your baby. So then I remember in the night, I'd be Googling if I went back to work, like, does that affect the attachment and the bonding? And does that, like, what kind of human grows up when they don't have the initial bonding, which sounds quite nuts now, but at the time you're thinking about it and you're going, oh God, am I going to be really bad from like day one? Or when my kid's a teenager, are they going to be like, I hate you? And I'm like, oh, well, we never bonded, or whatever it is. So you start having all these kind of feelings of, I need to do this. But equally, you work. That's who we are. We're not in the 60s where women just stay at home. And also, I mean, not that we'd want to be in the 60s, but equally, we're not in the 60s where one income is easily feasible. Most households need two incomes. So it becomes a financial thing as well as an emotional thing. And that is the recipe for disaster in having a baby be born when you want it to be born, because all these things are playing in your mind. And the midwives are going, just relax, do something fun so the baby can come. And you're like, oh my God. And all these kind of worries are coming in, and they tend to come in the middle of the night. So I had a lot of anxiety about, I wanted the baby to come, and every day that she was late, I was feeling more and more pressure. And I also really didn't want to be induced, which is a separate story around maternity services, but I really didn't want to be induced. But the baby wasn't coming. So I felt a lot of pressure and I wanted her to come. And then I started questioning my own body, because I was like, well, it's worked up until now, but now it's failing me. So I was getting angry at my own body in a way. And then I was thinking, I should have kept exercising more. And all these kind of things were happening. And then eventually she was born. And even on the day of my delivery, because again, there was it was a dramatic delivery. There's so many things. And at one point they said, we think a C-section might be the way. And so I was prepping for a C-section. And then in my head, even then I was going, I don't want a C-section because I've got to fly. How am I going to have a C-section? So even at my birth, I was thinking about work. And I was going, how am I going to fly? Because I think if I have a C-section, I can't. And then, some friends were like, I was fine with my C-section. And then I've got other friends who are like, it was the worst thing in the world. And it's you just don't know, because your body is your body and it will be different. And you don't, a bit like birth, you can plan all you want. I mean, it's funny, I had this amazing birth plan and it didn't go to that. So you're having to like juggle and make decisions while you're emotional, in my particular case, high on gas and air. And so it was just, I kept thinking, I can't do this. And then eventually I had to succumb, and I was like, what will be. And well, it was quite funny for me because I was in theatre. They prepped me for a C-section, so I had a full spinal block. And then in theatre they did one final check, and he went, oh no, you're 10 centimeters dilated, after having told me that I was too slow and I wouldn't get to 10 centimeters, so I needed the C-section. And then they said, actually, you've progressed really quickly. In 45 minutes you've dilated, you now need to push. But I couldn't feel anything, so I had a spinal block, so I couldn't push anything. But it's talking about my body failing me, which is the thoughts that were going through my head when my baby was late. And now I realize she wasn't late, she was just developing in her own time. My body, I couldn't feel anything, and my body just pushed the baby out. And they were getting ready with forceps and all these different things, and then the surgeon just went, oh, I don't know what your body's doing, but it's doing it. And he put the forceps down, and he was like, and my body literally pushed her out. I couldn't feel a thing. So people, they were going, push, and I was going, but I was just making a face because you can't feel. It's for surgery. I was ready for surgery. And then she came out, and it was incredible. It was an incredible feeling. It was a feeling that I genuinely felt like a superhero. I was like, oh my God, I've just birthed a human. It was insane. I felt very high on all of that. And we bonded straight. It was really nice that she didn't cry. She was on me. We had skin to skin. And that kind of made all the anxieties that I was worried about kind of float away. In that moment, I was like, this is great. We did this. We're a team. We'll figure it out. Whatever's meant to be will be. And she didn't cry. She was with me for an hour, and then they gave her to my husband, and then she started crying. and I remember saying to him, she doesn't know you. You have to speak. She only knows your voice. And he was like, okay. In a room full of, we were still in theatre because we were prepped for a C-section. He was going, hi, baby. And then everything was new. And I think then it was like the first night that I had her and I was on my own. My husband had to go home. And it was the only time that I didn't think about work, was probably the first night where I just delivered her. And I remember them putting her in a little cot, see-through cot next to my bed. And I just kept looking inside, and she was just looking at me. And I just thought, oh God, she's so vulnerable and she needs me completely. And it was the only time that I was just completely focused on her. And yeah, it was great. And then the next morning, someone from work messaged me being like, hey, have you had the baby? Because also when you're late, you get messages. And I'd read, someone said, don't tell anyone your due date. And if I ever have a second, I would never tell anyone my due date, because the amount of messages that I got just going, hi, have you had the baby yet? Hi, have you had the baby yet? And you've just got so much going on, and it's a constant reminder, and you feel like sending out a press release every week saying, I tell you what, when I've had the baby, I'll let you all know. That's what you feel like saying. But yeah, I probably had 24 hours where I didn't think about work really. And then I was back on it thinking, oh God, okay, I need to get better. And that's a really important thing, because you give birth, and people said to me beforehand, oh, you'll really miss your bump. You'll really miss your bump when it's gone. But no one talks about how long your bump stays after you give birth. And yeah, I remember getting up and I just felt like jelly. I didn't have any, obviously I didn't have any core muscles. I've not used my stomach muscles in, almost 10 months for me. And so I was just like, God, I had to hold everything. And I was like holding a baby and trying to hold my stomach up. And it was so big, it still felt really big. And I just remember thinking, God, I thought this would have gone down more than this. It was just, everything just looked big and jiggly. And I just remember being like, oh God. So then I thought, I have to be on camera in 2 weeks. Is this going to be gone in 2 weeks? Yeah, and no, it was not gone in 2 weeks. It was not gone.
So one thing I just wanted to ask you about was, did you have any role models? Did you know anyone who had done what you were planning to do?
So I spoke to a friend called Helen Skelton, who was recently on Strictly, and she's done loads of sports, and Helen has 3 kids. And I mean, you've got to take what Helen says, I felt, also with a pinch of salt, because Helen is probably the strongest person I know. And what is easy for Helen is probably not easy for the average person. Helen can do a lot. I mean, she was on Blue Peter for years, and all the trials that she did, all the records that she broke, all the things. I mean, yeah. So, but I spoke to Helen, and Helen was like, really early on when I'd found out they'd taken me off the pitch, and I was still early in my pregnancy, I remember Helen just going, oh, you can still do it. You can absolutely do it. And I was like, yeah, but I'm going to have a newborn, and they've taken me off the pitch. And she was like, message them and just say you'll be fine. She's like, you'll be fine. I've had 3. And she was like, I know people talk about the newborn stage being the worst, but it's not. It just gets progressively harder. And I was like, right. She went, so just do it. She was like, the newborn stage is probably the easiest. She was like, you'll be tired, but you've been tired in your life before, so you know how to deal with tiredness. And she went, the rest of the time, the baby will sleep. Just feed the baby will sleep, the baby will need changing, but she doesn't need eye contact all the time. She doesn't need you constantly entertaining and engaging her the way that she will when she starts crawling and when she starts walking and when she starts doing all of that stuff. And so she was just like, as long as you have someone with you. She told me that she'd done a job where she took her mum with her. So she was like, as long as you've got someone with you, it'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll work together. You can do it. Everything is manageable. You'll be tired, but you'll be fine. And I was like, okay. But because it was Helen, I thought maybe Helen can do it, but maybe I can't. And then I spoke to another presenter who was also pregnant around the same time with me. She was actually due after me and ended up having her baby before me. And she was just like, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You can do this. You can fly. You can do it. It's okay. She was like, you need to look after yourself. The amount of time that you have before you fly, bed rest, or, really, really rest, eat nutritious food, look after yourself, a lot of self-care. And then when you get out there, you'll be okay. And so they were the only two people that I really think were women that worked in my industry that said it would be fine. Most of my friends who had babies were just like, you can't do this. This is madness. You just can't. I couldn't even, they were saying things like, I couldn't string a sentence together. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. You can't. You just can't. And my mum was very worried about me going. Also, I think worries about flying with a newborn. We've had COVID, pandemic, all of this stuff. And so we went to a pediatrician, and I remember speaking to the pediatrician after I'd given birth. I'm like, am I mad? Am I mad? Am I a really bad mother for doing this? And he was really funny. He just sort of said, babies are really resilient. Babies are born in war zones. There are babies being born in much harder circumstances than your circumstance. You're going to Doha, particularly Qatar, that has some of the best surgeons and medical staff, because lots of people retire there for numerous different reasons. You will be fine. He was like, it will be hard, but it will probably be harder for you than it will be for the actual baby. So in terms of your newborn, don't worry. Because I was worried about vaccines and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like,
probably exactly what you needed to hear at that point.
Yeah, he was really great. And he just said, make sure that you breastfeed as much as you can, because breastfeeding gives baby as much immunity. But even breastfeeding, like, some people have amazing births, and then the breastfeeding journey is really, really difficult. And I don't think I really understood the why with that. Mine happened to be okay. It was a little bit tricky at first, I think, because I hadn't quite figured out the latch, and I was being very delicate with my baby. And then the midwife was like, oh no, she's latching wrong. And like, yeah, she like manhandled her differently, and then was like, do this, and on she goes. And I was like, oh, okay. And the baby was fine. And then once we got the latch sorted, it was fine. And I remember figuring out how to and when to pump when I was actually out there was trickier. But yeah, I'd say the anxieties came before, and then when I knew I was going, I was just worried more about newborn, not so much about me. If I could go back in time, I'd probably have given myself more self-care at the start, and I would not have apologized. I apologized so much. And then the night before, we were packing frantically, me and my husband, and bearing in mind, you're packing for like 6 weeks, and you're packing for a little person that you've known for 2 weeks that is going to grow, and I don't know how much she's going to grow by. And so I was going, right, what do we take? And then we were in a panic, and she had been really, really great. She would just kind of sleep or just sit in her bouncer, and that evening, the evening we were packing, she just wanted to be held. And I think she could sense that we were both going, what are we doing? We're mad. We were just stressing a lot. We packed so much stuff. We just didn't know what we were doing. We were like just putting everything in a case, and I had a baby who just wanted to be held the whole time, and I was going, what about this? And then if I kind of raised my voice a bit, you could sense that she would get upset. And so, they really feel what you feel. So I had to try and be calm, but we were not calm. And I remember when we made it through check-in, and we bought a buggy that was great because you could take it onto the flight. And we were waiting in check-in, and waiting. And then I thought, oh my God, she's going to get hungry soon, and she's going to need a feed. And it's weird because I'm Brazilian, and in Brazil, you just have a queue for pregnant women, for women with children, elderly people. Like they go past anyone in any queue. So it could be in a shop, it could be at the post office, it definitely would be in an airport, in a bank. They just naturally go to the front at a bus stop. And the UK just does not have that. It does not have that. And as a society and a culture, people don't care. You could be disabled, you could be pregnant, you could be elderly, you're waiting in the queue. Everyone's like, get to the back of the queue. It's a weird feeling, and you're thinking, I don't want to push in front, but I'm going to need to feed her, and she's going to and she's gonna cry, and this is gonna make me stress, it's gonna make you stress, but yeah, so I remember just being like, oh my God, please hurry up with the cues. And I remember when we got on the flight, it was the first time that I was like, okay, in 24 hours, how's this gonna go? Okay. Yeah, I think I've answered the anxiety question, hopefully.
But you got there and you did it, and I saw you on the screen and you made it look easy. What are you most proud of from that experience?
What am I most proud of? I'm proud that I managed to do it. I'm proud that I managed to do it. I'm proud that I managed to juggle it, because it was tough. I also think I was lucky. It's important that I say that I was lucky. I didn't have a baby that had colic. I didn't have a baby that had crazy reflux. I think she had a bit of reflux, but it didn't make her cry. I had a baby that, I'm going to say this and people are going to go, this isn't real. But I had a baby that from the day she was born, she would sleep 5 hours in the night. So I didn't have a difficult newborn phase. I think she's harder now than when I was in Doha. I think I was lucky that I had a newborn that was okay, didn't have any issues. I was lucky that I had a natural delivery, and so my recovery was all right. I would say the first 2 weeks in Doha was very difficult for me physically, because I kept apologizing. I felt the need to walk at everyone else's pace. I felt the need to not sit down. I felt the need to do all these things. So people, my producer would say, do you want a chair? Because he could see that I was struggling. And I would go, no, I'm fine. And then eventually he was like, I'm getting you a chair. And I kept saying sorry all the time. And I wish that I hadn't, because it's totally fine. It's totally normal. I wish that I had just gone, I'm so sorry, I can't walk at that pace. Because eventually, now I'm walking at that pace. But in the first 2 weeks, I didn't. So I'm proud that I did it. And I'm proud that I went and I tried, probably naively so. But I do, if I would give anyone else advice, it would be, you don't need to apologize. And probably not that you've asked me to give anyone advice, but I'm giving it anyway. I would say, yeah, physically, I would have given myself more time at the start. Just, you don't need to walk at everyone's pace. And if you'd said to people that you're walking with, can we slow down a little bit? They'd go, oh yeah, of course, because people just forget. And to have been a bit kinder to myself, because I remember putting on a dress on day one, and I was with my co-host, who happened to be the teeniest, tiniest female co-host ever, and she's lovely. I've worked with her before, and she's really sweet, but she's tiny. And I remember going, I can't stand next to you. Oh my God, I can't stand it. And they took a photo, and I could just see it, and I was like, I still look pregnant. And the men were really nice, and she was really nice. They were going, you gave birth 2.5 weeks ago. And I was like, oh, I know, but it looks awful. And it was just, it will go back and it's fine. Just don't say those things about yourself. What your body's done has been incredible. And I know it logically, and I follow these really body positive accounts, but when you're looking in the mirror, or when you see a photo of yourself and you know what you look like, and you're now looking at what you look like, it's tougher than I imagined to not go, I don't like that. And to want to exercise, but you shouldn't too early, because you can create more damage. So you just have to be, doing things that are slow. And it's hard, because the first thing I wanted to do was go for a run, when actually that isn't the right thing for me to do at that point. You need to give your body a rest. But I'm proud that I did it. I'm proud that we all came back in one piece. I think I'm mainly proud that I did it, whether it was great or not, we did it.
And some of those issues that you talked about there were very much, like you say, because you didn't have maternity leave, because you were freelance. What do you think could be done to make things easier for women in your position, in professions like sports reporting, where they're, and other freelance work, where they just pregnancy ends, baby's born, and there's a real pressure to get back to work?
I mean, it's still difficult for women who do have maternity leave. There's a great account on Instagram called Pregnant Then Screwed. And it's brilliant. And you see so many women that even, I've got a friend who's on maternity leave. She gave birth 2 weeks or 3 weeks after me. And day one of her maternity leave, her company messaged her to say that she was probably going to be made redundant after her maternity leave, which is just not great at all. And it's just, that doesn't help. That made her, she went on maternity leave on her due date where she started feeling contractions, and then her baby was late for a week, probably because she was stressing out. So there's a lot to be done in both sectors. I think in the freelance sector, you just feel like a fish out of water, and you can't see what the solution is, because it's not like there's a union. Maybe we need a Mick Lynch. We need a Mick Lynch for self-employed maternity people. We've got no union. We've got nobody as a spokesperson. You're kind of just expected to keep afloat, but there's no infrastructure in place. So not wanting to get too political, but I think it's probably up to the people in power to kind of acknowledge that there's some areas that are quite tricky, and there are people that fall into this area, quite a lot of people that fall into this area, and maybe they need a bit more help, because I think you get statutory maternity, which is not a lot, basically, not a lot at all. So it's hard. Yeah, I think it's probably a government thing. I think it needs to be something that's the powers that be. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? And if someone's watching and they're thinking, oh yeah, well, baby or no baby, I quite fancy being a sports reporter and going out to Brazil and not Brazil, sorry, out to Qatar for the World Cup. What have you got any advice for women who want to work in sports media?
Yeah, I think if you want to work in sports media, you've got to find what it is, what area, because there are so many areas that you can work in. So whether that's reporting like I do for broadcast and TV, whether it's radio, whether it's print, whether it's behind the camera, whether it's producing, whether it's camera operating, whether it's directing, whether it's research. There are so many jobs if you love sports and you want to work at these big events. So it's finding which area you want to be in, because it could be that you just love sports, but maybe you're camera shy and you don't want to be in front of camera. There's a million jobs behind camera. And if you do want to be in front of camera, there's a million different ways of getting there. And it could be that you start behind camera and then you work your way in front of camera. I think keep in mind that the big events are when there's more jobs. And sometimes you need to be humble enough to be a runner and get people's cups of teas and things like that. But I love it and I'd recommend it. I think it's great if you're someone who doesn't want to do the 9 to 5 and work in an office and you enjoy sports. You need to enjoy watching lots of sports, 100%. Otherwise it'd be hard.
And have a lot of sports knowledge, I guess. So building up your
yeah. So I mean, I don't know all sports, but I guess you would find either your niche sport that you really like, or you would, because also there are lots of sports that I've reported on that I didn't really necessarily know, particularly with Red Bull. They can tend to make up kind of their own sports. But as long as you have a love for sport, once you know the rules and once you find out the jeopardy and how it works, and you're thrilled by that, you can enjoy it. I worked on ice cross, which was a new sport that Red Bull essentially made up, and I loved it. So, and it's not something I grew up watching because it didn't exist.
Sure. Fantastic. Oh, well, I think it's really interesting to hear what you've said, and I take my hat off to you for what you did. And from, as I say, from a viewer's point of view, it looked like you did an amazing job. And I have to say, I've seen pictures of your baby online. She's absolutely beautiful. So congratulations for birthing her as well. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, it was good. I should probably say I had a lot of I didn't actually mention my husband, and I probably should. I had my husband who was out with me, and so he I mean, it's funny because when I said that I had my husband help, people just assume that it was him looking after the baby the whole time. And obviously it's not. My mornings would be, I'd wake up, I'd feed, I'd have my own breakfast, I'd give her a nap, and then I'd get her up, I'd feed, I'd get her dressed. So I was looking after my own baby, but my husband, once we got pumping regulated, because obviously the amount of milk that she needed changed, but once we knew how much and I was pumping and leaving enough milk for him, my husband was amazing. And I needed him to give me little updates while I was away working, because I'd be going, what's she doing? Is this okay? And we had a little app, which was great, which let me know what was happening. But he was fantastic. He really, really, it was like she had two mums, because I feel like when people say, oh, the dad was great, I think the bar for being a great dad is pretty low. It's like changing one nappy and everyone's like, he's amazing. Whereas I felt like he was a mum. So while we were out there, she had two mums. And that was really important, because I had his support, which isn't everyone's story. But I was very, very lucky because he was great.
Team effort, fearless together.
Yes, it was a team effort. It was a team effort.
Well, just to finish off, right, something completely different. I've just got about 6 quick fire questions for you, which are nothing to do with babies or sport. Well, maybe one might do cover sport. Are you up for that?
Yes.
Okay. First thing that comes into your head: coffee or tea?
Tea.
Singing or dancing?
Dancing.
Night in or night out?
Oh, night in.
Running or walking?
Running. Oh, surprised myself there.
Surprised me. And for the British people, a scone or a scone with cream then jam, or jam then cream?
Scone, and I would say cream then jam.
Oh, I'm disappointed. And for football, Brazil or England?
Brazil.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I'll forgive you for that one. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing that insight. I know that's going to be really helpful to people that are watching, that are mixing childbirth and work, and quite inspirational for them as well. And congratulations again on everything that you've achieved.
Oh, thank you so much, Juliet. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.